तो अभी मैं आप लोगों को इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ एसएपी बताने वाली हूँ. पॉइंट नंबर 1, ग्लोबली रिकॉग्नाइज्ड. It's used by top companies worldwide for efficient business management. Point number 2, high job demand. SAP professionals are in demand across industries like IT, finance, logistics, HR, and manufacturing. Point number 3, excellent salary packages. SAP certified individuals often receive higher pay due to their specialized skill sets. Point number 4, centralized data management. It integrates all business processes in one system, real time and accurate. Point number 5, faster career growth. Specialized SAP skills help professionals climb the career ladder quickly. Importance रखता है. SAP आज के टाइम पे हर प्रोफेशनल के लिए एक मस्ट हैव स्किल बन चुकी है, चाहे आप HR हो, फाइनेंस में हो या सप्लाई चेन में. SAP हर जगह यूज होता है. इसके एक्सपर्ट्स की डिमांड हर इंडस्ट्री में है और सैलरीज भी काफ़ी अच्छी मिलती है. SAP आपको स्मार्टली काम करना सिखाता है, मैनुअल काम कम, ऑटोमेशन ज़्यादा. आज के डिजिटल ज़माने में SAP जैसे ग्लोबल सॉफ्टवेयर टूल्स आपको एक एज देते हैं, कैरियर में फास्ट ग्रोथ मिलती है और मल्टीनेशनल कंपनीज में काम करने का चांसेस बढ़ जाते हैं आपके. और डिटेल्स के लिए हमारे एक्सपर्ट आपको समझाएंगे अब. थैंक यू.
Let's look at cost element master data. Let's look at the link between cost elements and GL accounts. As we mentioned earlier in our presentation, the GL accounts for revenue and expenses, we create them as primary cost elements. Now you have another cost element called secondary cost element. It is used for allocation and settlement within the CO module. Now, when you create the primary cost elements for the GL accounts, the revenue GL accounts are identified as revenue accounts in CO module by using the cost element category number 11. And the expense accounts for GL accounts are identified as expense account in the CO module as cost element category 1. Now this might be a bit technical. You will actually see when you are going to go and create the cost elements in the system, you need to select for expense account category 1 and revenue accounts category 11 is already available in the drop down menu with their descriptions. Let's look at creating primary cost elements. So to create the primary cost element, remember you're creating this for financial accounting, general ledger, expense and revenue accounts. So they must be created first in the SAP FI module. And you need to use the same GL account number. If you're using a 6-digit format for your expense account and it starts with, let's say, 501010, then that same ID 501010 must be used as a cost element ID. You cannot change the ID over there because you need to have a direct link between the FI and CO module, and that flows between the cost element and the GL account as a main link between these two modules. So that's why you cannot change the ID of that account. However, you could change the description of that name. Now you also have this option to create it manually, or you can also create this automatically via the system. Let's look at creating a cost element now. Now I'm going to create a cost element for my GL accounts. So let me go and first check my GL accounts. FS00, that's the transaction code to see general ledger accounts. If you're new to controlling module and if you're not seen prior how to do this in financial accounting module, just go to accounting, financial accounting, general ledger, master records, GL accounts, individual processing, and here you have this option FS00. You can see at both the chart of account level and the company code level. So I'm just going to execute that FS00, and here I need to look at my expense accounts and P&L accounts. So I'm going to select over here. I know my expense account starts with the 5. This as per my account group configuration in the financial accounting module. I have set it up as all expense accounts should start with the 5 and all revenue accounts to start with the 4, and it's a 6-digit format. So I have a few expense accounts over here. This is my chart of accounts, ZCOA. So let me start creating a cost element for this. 501000 stationery expense. I'm just going to double click that. Company code is over here, and I'm just going to display the entries. I'm not going to do any changes. For display, I need to click this icon with the spectacles, and it gives me the information here: stationery expense, and so on. Now to create the cost element, I can go and click this option, edit cost element. So from while creating the financial account, that's the GL account itself, you can go to the CO module and create for the GL account a cost element. Just as soon as you finish saving it, you can go and click on edit cost element over here. That will take you to the CO module create cost element screen. And that automatically brings you here. It gives a validity date from this to this, and the cost element ID has to be the same. Now you can click on master data or press enter in your keyboard, and you can see by default the name also appears the same. If you want, you can change the name over here, but its best practice is leave it as it is, so you can always easily reconcile between this and the financial accounting descriptions. Now this is where you need to select the cost element category. This is an expense account. As I mentioned earlier in my slide, expense accounts, you need to select category number 1, which says primary costs, because it's all expense. Also another word for expenses is costs, so you're just going to call it as primary costs. So I'm just going to select that. Don't worry about the other options. For our purpose for this presentation, we'll only look at the primary costs and revenues. So this is an expense. I'm going to select primary cost over here. Okay. And in the next step, we have something called indicators. If you want to record quantities using this cost element, we're not going to look at those information. That's a bit too advanced for us now at this stage. Now let's look at default account assignment. For example, if we want this cost element to post to only this cost center or this internal order or any type of other orders, you can specify that cost center over here. So at the time of entry itself, when you mention this cost element, the GL account, at the time of any postings, automatically the cost center field will get populated. Of course, you have option to overwrite this as well, but it is for ease of convenience. For example, you might have all your fleet management vehicles are managed by one particular cost center. So any type of vehicle expenses, you can define to use that particular fleet management cost center. So users don't have to go and enter the cost center every time. So for this type of making it easier, the system has allowed you to specify a cost center as a default account assignment object for a relevant cost element. This is an expense account over here. Similarly, you can specify an internal order, or you can specify any other type of orders like plant maintenance orders or any relevant order types. And of course, it shows when this was created and all the history, just like you saw for cost center master data. You have change documents for cost element changes as well. And save the transaction. And you'll get a message over saying cost element has been created. Now let me show you creating cost element in another method. Now I'm going to create a cost element for another GL account. So let me just select a GL account for which one I want to create for. I'm just going to put 5 and a star. That will bring out my expense accounts. And I will choose this option, office supplies expense 502000. So for this particular GL account, I'm going to create the cost element, but I'm not going to go and click on edit cost element. I'm just going to open a new screen and create it via the cost element master data screen. So you have another way of looking at how to create cost elements. So I'm going to go to accounting, controlling module, cost element accounting, master data, cost element, individual processing, and it's going to be a primary cost element because all financial GL accounts are going to be created as primary cost elements. So I'm going to select create primary. The short transaction code for this is KA01. And I've already created 501000. The one I wanted to create was 502000. So I'm going to type it in 502000. Press enter in my keyboard. And you can see by default the name and description is coming because this is linked to the FI GL accounts. So because linked via this ID, so automatically it pulls out the name and description exactly as it is over here. You can see the short text and the GL account long text that comes into the CO module as name and description for this particular cost element. Now it's time for me to select the cost element category. Expense accounts is 1 just like you created before, and you can see all the other tabs are there as earlier, and you can save the transaction. And that's how you create the cost element. Now we saw two different ways of creating cost element. The third way of creating cost element is via the SAP customization menu path. So the menu path is controlling, cost element accounting, master data, scroll down to cost element, and automatic creation of primary and secondary cost element. This one option, whereas batch input, you can mass create at the same time many cost elements. So to do this, you need to do the necessary configurations over here. So first execute make default settings. Mention your chart of accounts over here. Press OK to continue. And you can see now you need to start specifying the ranges over here. So this mentions from what account to what account, from which GL account to which GL account, what should the cost element category be, and you can specify a short description if you want. So let's start filling this up now. So I'm just going to select new entries. The short description to automatically flow from the cost element category. So I'm going to specify all my expense accounts. I'm going to specify 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All my expense accounts are within this range. Should have cost element category 1, that is primary costs. All my revenue accounts, which is my 4 series, this defined as per the account group setting in financial accounting. So all my revenue accounts, just want to see, I think I only have 1 or 2 revenue accounts, so let me just show you the system. So I put a 4 and the asterisk sign and search. Yep, I have a couple of revenue accounts over here. They should have cost element category number 11. That's showing you as revenues. And you save this. Press OK for the transport request. So this setting has been saved. So any GL accounts between this range to this range will be created with the cost element category 1, and any revenue account within this range will be created with the cost element category number 11. So I'm going to exit this transaction. Then you create the batch input session for this. So that is predefined over here. You have put already the controlling area, valid from dates is mentioned, who's going to use, what's the username, and you can also give a session name over here and execute this batch input. Now we have already created a few cost elements. As we mentioned this, we already created this earlier. So you might get an error in the system saying this has already been created, but it's okay. You can ignore that and proceed to create the others. Now it will display of all the possible ones that system will create for the GL accounts. These are the 2 revenue accounts, so it's going to be assigned with cost element category number 11, and this is a description of the GL account. And these are all the other GL accounts which we have not created yet, and they'll be also be assigned with the cost element category number 1, and you can see all the expense account descriptions over here. And finally, now you have set up those things. Now you can actually execute the batch input session which you have just created now. So batch input sessions in SAP, first you need to create the batch input session, and next you need to execute that batch input session. So it automatically comes up over here. So all you have to do is select and process. And here I'm going to say display errors only. If there are any errors, just going to click on expert mode, so it becomes a simple style, and process. Now if you have a large number of entries, you can just click on background and run the job, and then you can see if the job has finished or not. But for now I'm just going to say display errors only, because I know it will throw up with 2 errors, 501,000 and 502,000, because I have already created them. So once you have already created a cost element, you cannot recreate them again with the same ID. So I just want to see that as well, so process. So just as I thought, the error is coming up over here. If I can take you to the screen, cost element already exists, so that's fine. I'm just going to ignore that because I have just created that. So I'm going to say cancel, and it's asking you exiting the transaction. Do you still want to keep the batch input data? Just press yes. This is for the second cost element, which also I have just created earlier. Error is coming, that's fine. I'll just cancel this. Yes, and it will proceed to create the rest of the cost elements. and now you're getting a message saying process of batch input session completed. If you want to create multiple cost elements, but if you feel that you might have created a few cost elements in between and you don't want to go and press and go through after each error, then of course it's best to run in the background. So when you run in the background, it will only create what is necessary need to be created. It will ignore the ones which has already been created. And you can just click on session overview and just giving a message saying how many created. 8 have been created and 2 not created. So that's fine. Just minimize this. Now let's go and display the cost elements for our system. So /n KA03 is to display cost elements. It automatically comes up with the last cost element. So I'm going to check for my chart of accounts, then COA, and press OK to continue. And now it's going to display all the cost elements over here. Now we only created this as one by one, and the rest system automatically has created. That's how we can automatically create cost elements easily from GL accounts to the CO module of the cost elements. And for each of these cost elements, it's going to select one. I can see the relevant cost element category is also mentioned over here as one, because we have given that in the range. Let's look at creating secondary cost elements. Now secondary cost elements are not created in the SAP FI module. Now we saw earlier in our slide for primary cost elements, the revenue and expense accounts are created in the FI module. Then you create the primary cost elements in SAP CO module, and they have a direct link between the FI and CO module because you use the same ID of the GL account as a cost element ID as well. So first it had to be created in FI module, then you create in the CO module. But that is not the case for secondary cost element, because these secondary cost elements are purely created in the CO module. So I use the word exclusive in the CO module for their own internal cost flows for allocation or settlements. So secondary cost elements are not created in FI module, it's only created in the CO module. Then the third statement which I mentioned over here is that the same GL account number cannot be used for secondary cost element. So for example, we saw for expense account 501000, we created that as a primary cost element. You cannot use that same ID and create it as a secondary cost element, because those GL accounts can only be created as a primary cost element. Also, you cannot use another GL account, like for example an asset account like petty cash account 101000 and create as a secondary cost element. So I advise you that you use identifier for secondary cost element as far away as possible from the GL account number ranges. You can even start with the alphabet also, like start it with the P or a S or any other alphabet. But I of course prefer to use numbers. It's always easier to remember numbers with just a combination of numbers. So I would like to use the number 8 for all our secondary cost element creation, and I can have 6-digit format, like for example 801000, and I can call it as allocation of salary expenses, like some kind of overhead cost which I will allocate to the relevant production cost centers. Now let's look in the system of creating a secondary cost element. You have to create secondary cost element via the SAP Easy Access menu. Remember, you can't create this via the FI module where you go to FS00 and you create on edit cost element. You can't do that option. You have to create secondary cost element via the short transaction code KA06. You can also create this by the menu path over here: controlling, cost element, accounting, master data, cost element, individual processing, and create secondary cost element. So let me execute this transaction. And I'm going to give a secondary cost element starting with the 801000, and I'm going to call this as allocation of salary expenses. So I'm going to call it allocation of salary expenses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the non-production related costs and cost of for salaries, like my admin staff salary expense, my IT staff salary expense, my finance team staff salary expense. I'm going to correct all those salary expenses, and I'm going to allocate them to the production lines. So then I will know how much my actual products are going to cost. The allocated, so the products will have their own direct expenses in terms of their raw materials or whoever the engineers or all the other labor costs related to those products. But the overhead costs such as salary expense, IT, finance, admin, all those overhead costs, you need to allocate them to those products as well to get a final true reflection of what is your actual profitability like. So that's how I'm going to create a secondary cost element called allocation of salary expenses. And here I'm going to use the cost element category. So for allocation of expenses, you can use the cost element category number 42 over here. Now there is two type of allocation. One is called distribution or assessment. Distribution will use the actual GL account number, which is your actual cost element number itself for the expense accounts, and allocate it. Whereas assessment will take all the related expense accounts and allocate it via this particular cost element number. That's more in detail we'll discuss during for allocation and allocation cycles and how we do all those creation of allocation cycles. We'll discuss that more in detail. For now, you can see these are all the secondary cost element types in the system. And I'm just going to use number 42 for now. And save the transaction. And that's how you create a secondary cost element. It's quite easy. Just have to give an ID over here, give from which date to which date is valid, and give a name and choose the correct cost element category. I'll also show you how to create cost element groups. Now you can see just under the cost element accounting, master data, just below the cost element, you have the option called cost element group. Cost element group is useful for one thing, is for reporting. So rather than actually going and identifying for each GL account or each cost element, entering one by one or putting a range, you can just directly create a group for them and just give the group ID. So it's much easier for displaying the reports, and also for you is easier for you to enter the information in the system. Also, cost element group is useful for allocation of cycles. We'll see that more in detail when we come to the allocation section. But for now, we'll just quickly create a group just to show you how to create cost element groups. Cost element group means just a grouping of all the cost elements in the system. Or you can decide whether you want to include all or just a few or only one. The flexibility is up to you. The short transaction code for this is KAH1. And I'm just going to call my group called EXPS just for expenses. I'm just going to give it any 4 character ID. You can have up to maximum of 10 characters I think over here. I'm just going to give it as EXPS, and I'm going to call it cost element. I'm just going to call it expenses group. Just give it any ID over here. This is applicable for your controlling area, so you can't have the same group ID created again with the same ID. If you want to create another expenses group, I would suggest you can use EXP01 or 1 or something like that. So I'm going to now this is the group ID and the name. Now I'm going to insert the cost elements over here. So just have to click on this, insert cost element, and here you can specify one by one, like listing them down over here. You can copy and paste via Excel or any other type of formats, or you can give a range. If you give one here and an ID number here and a number here, that will be like a range. So I'm just going to specify a range here, 50000 to 599999, because I know all my expense accounts are going to lie within this number range, and press enter. And you can see all the expense accounts are listed over here. Now whenever you have a new cost element created, you don't have to go and update this because you have already specified a range. So that's how you go and create cost element groups. We'll see the use of this in more detail when you actually come to the allocation cycles, but it's also useful for reporting also. We can just directly type the ID of the group and run the reports rather than individually keying in all these numbers. And press save, and you can see the changes have been saved and this group is created now. Now as part of your assignment, create a primary cost element. You can use directly the short transaction code KA01, or you can go to FS00, enter the GL account, and from there also you can click on the button edit cost element and create a primary cost element. Remember to put the correct cost element category, number 1 for expenses and number 11 for revenues. Also practice creating a secondary cost element. Just like I showed you in the example, you can give your own ID for your secondary cost element and create it with the relevant cost element category. For now, use assessment cost element category number 42. Also practice creating a cost element group. Now here you can define your own group ID, give it a description, and include the primary cost elements or even the secondary cost elements also you can include within the cost element group. And we'll see later how this group is useful for reporting purpose.